cancer diagnosis at the age of 32, my mom and I talked a lot about the shock of that diagnosis, given several doctors told us you're too young to have endometrial cancer. After much discussion, we began to feel driven to inform and help educate other young women about what symptoms they should be concerned.
Having both been teachers, it seemed natural for us to look for a way to share Alex's cancer journey in order to help other young women avoid such a shocking diagnosis or possibly navigate a similar path. A podcast seemed the best way to get the word out, and that's how Down There Aware was born.
4 years later, our mother-daughter duo has gone from educating and informing to advocacy and action, with a fresh and sometimes very interesting and somewhat humorous multi-generational perspective.
We look forward to sharing with you Season 4 as we advocate, take action, and make it a priority to always be Down There Aware.
Welcome back to another episode of Down There Aware. I am in the same clothes that you saw me in last week.
As am I.
And it'll be like that for a little while because we film these ahead of time. Because right now, we're in Germany! Just imagine. That's where we are. And it's very exciting.
Yes, I've spent the last few days and will spend the next few days just in Germany mode, trying to get ready, trying to be sure I have everything I need.
My dining room table has been commandeered by my suitcase, and everything I'm like, I want to take that or I want to try to pack that. It's just in a pile right now, not organized, but it is in that area, and I know that's where I want it to be, and so.
Mine too. My suitcase is on the guest bed, and I just walk in and put things down, and Alex gets me stuff, orders me stuff for the trip, and I just lay it on top of my suitcase, and that's just my mode of thinking right now.
But if you're listening to this the day it comes out, that's our first full day. We've landed, and we're trying to figure out the train system, and
the two episodes ago, but just 1 week ago in recording, it was so cold here. The high was like in the 40s, and that's so unlike Florida. And we were in, sweaters and all bundled up. And then now the high's in the 80s just a week later. And
which has been good for packing because before I was like, well, I'm going to have to wear my winter clothes and then wash and then pack them. But now I'm like, no, I can wash them and pack them and put them away because
it's too hot.
It's too hot. We just need them for Germany.
And that's hard to wrap your head around. We're sweating here, but we've got to be prepared to be bundled up.
Yeah, I think last I looked, the high the day we land is 42 and rainy, which we knew it was going to be. It's kind of the rainy season. But today it was snowing. So I hope it'll get just a little bit colder and we'll get some snow, which will be exciting. But we are continuing our world tour of cancer info, statistics, things like that. If you have not listened to last week's episode, I would encourage you to pause and go back because at the beginning of that episode, we talk about some statistics terms that really inform the information that we're going to talk about, as well as some world statistics. And then at the end, we talked about our first region, which was Asia.
And that would be episode 5.
Yep, episode 5 of the season 4. So just go check that out. But today, Mom's going to tell us a little bit about Australia.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Australia. Now, I think this is very indicative of the multi-generational hosts for this show. When Alex talked about Asia last week, she had her laptop in front of her, which she does now, and
because we just stopped recording that episode 5 minutes ago,
and that's where she read from. I printed out my research and highlighted it.
In true millennial fashion, I don't own a printer. If I need something printed, which is pretty rare, but if I do, I either, sorry FSU, printed at work, or we'll print it. I'll just email it to mom and be like, can you print this? Like tickets for a show or something like that.
And it happens periodically, probably fairly frequently, that it's pointed out to us that Alex is a millennial and I'm a boomer. We were at the bank
Oh yeah.
to open an account for the nonprofit, and at the end of the meeting the guy says, well, you need a check, and Alex thought they'd take a different form of payment, and so she said, well, I don't have a checkbook, and I said, I do.
It was just one of those things that I had all of our documents that we needed to open the account in a folder with our nonprofit information, our business information, our articles of incorporation, like all of this stuff. I had it all. Now, I had emailed it to mom and asked her to print it, but I had it all. But it never crossed my mind. And I knew we would need an initial deposit to open the account. Never in a million years crossed my mind that I would need a check.
But anyway, that's one more example of, the multi-generational relationship, and it's been fun.
Well, and I think it also has been really helpful because our listenership really ranges.
Yeah.
I think 70 or 80% of our listeners are between like 25 and 45, but that's a pretty wide range. But we have lots of listeners who are older than that, and some listeners who are even younger than that. So I think it's good to have different perspectives.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Australia. I was encouraged. We talked last episode about statistics and data, and sometimes numbers can just be frustrating and more of a pain than anything. But two of the sites where I got some information from were very different. One was the Australian government, and the other was an overview of gynecologic cancers in Australia that came from Medical Board.
And side note, not to interrupt, but all of these links and things, don't feel like you need to scratch that down. Go to the website, downthereaware.com. Everything will be in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah,
links,
we'll put all the
charts,
links.
All that stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, the statistics between these two documents were exact. Like the first one was in 2008, there were 4,534 new gynecologic cancer diagnoses in Australia. That exact number, 4,534, was in both of the. So, they took the whatever study, they used the same study and published that information. So, out of the 4,534 new diagnoses, they said that came to about 12 females every day. As I went on to read, out of those 12 females diagnosed every day, 4 of them died.
Wow. Did they give a time frame of within a certain amount of time?
No.
But still, I mean, that's a third of women diagnosed with, and was that a specific type of cancer or just cancer overall?
It was just cancer overall.
Wow.
Gynecologic cancer
But
specific.
a third of all women in Australia diagnosed with gynecologic cancer. No wonder the Conquer Cancer campaign has been rooted in Australia.
Yeah.
They're really affected by it.
Yeah. So, also in 2008, uterine cancer was the most commonly diagnosed gynecologic cancer, over 2,000 cases.
Now that is interesting to me.
I thought so.
In all of my research, everywhere, cervical cancer ranks number 1 almost universally. But again, that Conquering Cancer campaign is focused on cervical cancer, and it started in Australia. So they have to be making waves and, making an impact to prevent new diagnoses and things like that with the vaccine and screenings.
And before that campaign started, there were studies, there were trials, they were working on cervical cancer.
Right.
So that might account for a lot of that. In 2007, ovarian cancer was the most common cause of gynecologic cancer. So in 2007 it was ovarian, in 2008 it was uterine.
Wow.
So in just a year. Now, the ovarian was 848 deaths, and they specified deaths. But in 2008, there were over 2,016 cases of diagnosed gynecologic cancer. So
wow.
I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, that definitely is.
Let's see. The number of deaths from ovarian and uterine cancer rose from 1982 to 2007, while the number of cervical deaths fell over the same period. And that kind of is in keeping with that campaign.
Which I just think speaks volumes about how necessary it is to find preventative measures, if possible, screening measures, vaccine measures, and then also another tier that we talk less about with the Conquer Cancer campaign, but it's there, is the treatment. Yeah. Because it's a treatable disease.
Right.
And so, they have those 3 pillars, the vaccine, screening, and then treatment. And it just blows my mind that, if we put all our effort into that area, look what we can do. We can make changes. So can we do that with other cancers?
I think there has been a lot of focus on treatment, but I agree that screening probably would cut back the need for treatment.
Yep.
Yeah. Probably in a huge way.
Definitely. Well, and we know with uterine cancer specifically, there are pre-cancers that develop into uterine cancer. And if they are found through a screening process, they can be very easily treated without hysterectomy. They can be treated with either hormone therapy or with a combination of hormone therapy and DNC procedures. But people often go and they're fine, it's eliminated. So again, sooner screenings in women of certain ages, and then also listening to their symptoms.
Yeah. On a personal note, I had several pap smears come back abnormal cells, and then I had precancerous cells, and that's when my doctor said, look, you're finished having children. I was only my early 50s, but finished having children. He said, you have these horrific periods anyway. Why don't we just talk about a hysterectomy? And I think because of those screening, had I not had the pap smear every year, then we wouldn't have had the conversation. And what was going on with me could very well have turned into a gynecologic cancer. But because I did have the screening, that was never an issue. And I just feel so strongly about the screenings, and I wish a lot more focus would be put on those.
Yeah, and access to those screenings. We know here in the States, every woman can have an annual well women visit, and it's covered either by your insurance or by our healthcare marketplace at no cost to the patient. So that's something that our country has put into place. I think other what we call high income countries have put that into place, but there are still places like the UK. They're pretty freaking high income, but they do not recommend an annual screening, and some women have to go through private insurance. They have kind of a universal insurance program there, but they have to go to private insurance and pay exorbitant fees to have these screenings, and so then they're not doing it. So it
would save so much money
in the treatment process, and it would get people out of the hospital. It would,
aside from the fact that people wouldn't be diagnosed.
Right, there are just so many positive things. I cannot think of one negative thing about pre-screenings or prevention.
Right.
I can't think of one negative thing. We should run the world.
Yeah, we kind of sound like know-it-alls, and we don't mean to come across that way, but we have strong opinions.
Yeah, I went to a vineyard with a friend on Friday for happy hour, and the cider I drank was called If I Brew the World. And I was like, man, if I only.
Okay, to go on about Australia. Survival from ovarian, uterine, and cervical cancer has improved over time from 1982 to 1987 to 2006 to 2010. So they're grouping together 4-year periods. The 5-year relative survival for ovarian cancer increased significantly from 32% to 43%. For uterine cancer, it increased from 75% to 82%. And for cervical cancer, from 68% in the 82 to 87 time period to 71% in the 88 to 93 time period.
Wow.
But this next phrase is a gotcha. But there was no significant change, or no significant changes were seen in the more recent time periods. So the latest was up to 93 for cervical cancer, 2010.
So it's just kind of stayed stagnant.
Yeah, which that's kind of
It makes
sad.
you wonder, like, what happened between the late 80s and the late 90s that treatments, screening processes, all of that, but then nothing happened after the late 90s.
Yeah.
It really does make you wonder. And we talked in our last episode about, very briefly, that when pap smears were introduced in the 1960s, dramatically cervical cancer incidence rate went down. And so, you know, but it makes you wonder, well, that was almost 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it? Was there just an informational campaign of, you know, like the got milk kind of thing from the 90s of you need calcium, are you drinking milk? Things like that. But again, speaking to what we're trying to work with companies who produce period products, people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to put a QR code right on that box. It would be very simple. Would every single person who uses those products, you know, look that up? No. But I guarantee you some of them would get curious and it would be helpful.
Well, and not only would they get the information, but then they would talk about it, word of mouth.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
So. All right, more on Australia. Of those 4,534 gynecologic cancer diagnoses that we talked about, of these, 2,016 were uterine cancer, 1,272 were ovarian cancer, 778 were cervical cancer, 282 were vulvar cancer, and 70 were vaginal cancer. More than 60% of ovarian and uterine cancers were diagnosed in females aged 60 and over. Now that
tracks.
That tracks. And unfortunately, that encourages the mindset that only the older women are going to get uterine cancer.
But read that percentage again.
More than 60% of ovarian and uterine cancers were diagnosed in females aged 60 and over.
Okay, so when I was a teacher, if you got 60%, you were still failing my class.
Yeah.
I mean,
but somehow we've accepted.
Right, that just because it's more than or it's the most or whatever, but there's still 40%. That's almost half.
It is almost half. So why is that the protocol?
Right.
Why is that the norm? And I really, we've talked about this. I do think there needs to be a change in medical schools.
Yes.
And how doctors are taught, what they're taught about those norms, because the norms are changing. We even when we talked to Dr. Mary Jennifer Markham, she's a gynecologic oncologist, and she even said, we've seen changes in trends.
Yeah, and she's not old.
No, so I taught her in elementary school.
So she's been practicing 15, 20 years max? I don't know, but she hasn't been practicing 80 years, right?
Yeah, but she sees the
But she has already seen that there's a change.
Yeah.
And, you know, as important as it is for all academic fields to continue research and produce, new studies and things like that, medicine is just as important, because it's not in a vacuum, right? Like, there's environmental changes and there's cultural changes and there's just so much is happening that they can't just rest on their laurels and rely on, well, over 60%. Okay, what about the other 40%?
Yeah, well, and let's look at the comparisons. So for ovarian and uterine, it was females ages 60 and over was 60% of ovarian and uterine, while about 70% of cervical cancers were diagnosed in females under the age of 60. That isn't surprising.
No, because of the screening process.
Exactly.
Because generally, younger women are getting their annual pap smears, and I don't have any statistics on this, but I anecdotally believe that probably when women hit menopause, they kind of don't see a point in going anymore.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I know, I'm 68. I'll be 69 this year. I feel like I'm 25.
You are.
In my mind.
You're as old as you believe you are.
But you kind of get in a mindset of, I have a whole lot more years behind me than I have ahead of me. So I'm not going to fret about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, now, I don't think that means you shouldn't go to the doctor, because I do believe in quality of life, and I do think doctors can diagnose and help you feel better if something's going on. But anyway, that's an aside. Let's continue about Australia. In the years between 2004 and 2008, they're saying 5 years. So in those 5 years, the incident rate of ovarian cancer was significantly higher in major cities than in outer regions. Now, I always find any geographical component interesting. We talked about China and the differences in that region, but anyway, ovarian cancer is significantly higher in major cities rather than in outer regional areas, while cervical cancer was significantly higher in remote and very remote areas rather than in major cities. And inter-regional areas, rather than in major cities and inter-regional areas. In contrast, there was no statistical significant variation by remoteness for uterine cancer.
And again, another statistics term we didn't really go over last week was statistically not important. What's the word you just used? You just read
insignificant?
Insignificant and significant. Whew. So that's just, literally a number that they do all their calculations, and it either is significant or not in correlation and things like that. So that's
so ovarian, just to simplify a little, ovarian diagnosis was significantly higher in major cities. Cervical cancer was significantly higher in remote and very remote and areas. And with uterine cancer, there was no variation in region.
Wow.
So it makes you wonder why.
Right.
I mean, that's always my go-to.
Right.
Why? Major cities, ovarian. And it kind of makes you wonder if there isn't some environmental factor.
Yeah, something.
Yeah. Okay, to move on, the incidence rate of ovarian cancer did not vary by socioeconomic status. However, the incident rates of uterine and cervical cancer were higher in the lowest socioeconomic status group compared with other groups. So cervical and uterine, lower socioeconomic. Ovarian did not vary by socioeconomic. So I can't even guess at what that's about. We have talked about data and how, numbers are important, but they can also be misconstrued or misunderstood, really. Yeah. And I thought this was interesting. The incident Incidence data indicate the number of new gynecological cancers diagnosed during a specific period, usually 1 year, a 1 year period. While these data refer to the number of gynecological cancers diagnosed and not the number of females diagnosed, it is rare, although it is possible, that a female would be diagnosed with 2 or more primary gynecological cancers in a 1 year period.
I know people from the Peach group who they were diagnosed with both uterine and ovarian, or uterine and cervical, or vulvar and uterine. Yeah.
So it's saying, to sum up, thus the annual number of new gynecological cancers is practically the same as the annual number of females diagnosed with gynecologic cancers. But you can't equate that,
right?
You know, it means people.
Yeah, because it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. It means a diagnosis.
Right.
So I thought...
Well, and that it kind of makes me wonder, so my oncologist has said if my cancer returns, it would return most likely to be vaginal cancer. Now, I don't know, because we haven't really gone into it because it hasn't returned. Is that metastasized to the vagina, or is it vaginal cancer?
Well, from what I understand, you go from the origin of the cancer. Like my friend who had breast cancer, she ended up with liver cancer, but they called it breast cancer that was in the liver because.
But I wonder, because they can do all the DNA stuff now. Could you potentially like if I got lung cancer, could that be just isolated lung cancer, where the fact that I had uterine cancer doesn't affect it?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
Good to know.
But we talk about things like I am.
All right, what is the average age of diagnosis? In 2008, the average age at first diagnosis varied across the different types of gynecological cancers.
Naturally.
The mean age at first diagnosis of both ovarian and uterine cancer, this is the mean age, 64. Again, it's kind of validating that mindset that,
Well, and mean, I don't think is the right measure there, because if you know that 60% or more of your diagnoses are over 60, it's going to be weighted.
Yeah.
So when you do an average or you take the mean, it's going to be weighted. So a median age or an ASR would be better use in that instance.
Yeah.
You should talk to them. Talk to the Australian government about their statistics.
Well, and we know my sister was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at the age of 58.
Yeah.
And
she had probably had it.
She'd probably had it for a
little while. Yeah.
But again, not diagnosed because of
all kinds of reasons.
Kind of obscure symptoms. And, anyway, cervical cancer had the lowest mean age at first diagnosis at 51, whereas vaginal and vulval cancers had the highest at 70 and 67.
That kind of surprises me about cervical cancer.
Yeah, it did me too.
Specifically because,
was the mean.
We generally see cervical cancer being diagnosed younger. That's fascinating.
And so to sum that up, for all gynecological cancers combined, the mean age at first diagnosis was 62. So quit publishing this. I know their numbers, but I'm just afraid that they continue to encourage that mindset.
Well, and if I was smart enough to take their data and put it, and adjust for age, to be weighted, because I think that is important.
Yeah.
Because what the ASIR does, it takes the age of the population and weights your data to relate to the age of the population, the percentage of ages in the population. So if the majority of your people are young, it would weight it young.
Yeah. So, that kind of gives us an overview specific to gynecological cancers. in Australia. Good on them that they're, doing research and publishing and trying to get the word out. But like we said, it's not just Australia. Everywhere we'd like to see, we'd like to not harp on old people get this kind of cancer.
Well, and I just wish that doctors weren't surprised anymore.
Yeah, I think
when
that's
young
the big
people
thing.
are diagnosed, and it's not just gynecologic cancer. I see on TikTok and the Today Show and People all the time, almost daily, there's an article about a young person who had lung cancer, wasn't a smoker, was diagnosed with lung cancer only after they persisted.
Yeah.
And for every person who is on the Today Show about their cancer that they persisted to get a diagnosis, how many are not persisting and just living with chronic symptoms that could be cancer?
Well, and that's why it's so important to us. As much as we fumble and as much as we know we're not medical doctors, we know we don't have that expertise or experience, but we have the passion for getting the word out, to be your own advocate. Don't just put up with symptoms.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if somebody says, oh, you're a hypochondriac, or oh, you're, that's hyperbole, you're just overdoing it.
Keep pushing.
Yes, keep pushing and keep asking questions, and go to a different doctor if you don't get the answers you want in a doctor, or the answers you need. You need to have answers that answer your questions.
Yeah. Well, and I talk about the doctor a lot who said, oh, you're too young to get this kind of cancer. But
it wasn't just one doctor,
but specifically the doctor who ordered the DNC.
Yeah.
He was the one who, quote, said, you're too young to get this type of cancer. I'm not concerned about it. You shouldn't be either. But he ordered the test anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that is the kind of doctor, like, okay, you're skeptical. Okay, we haven't seen it. Let's change your language to say that you can't get this and that you shouldn't be worried about it. But you ordered the test.
Right.
Because there are some doctors who say that, have that language of, oh, you can't get this, whatever, and dismiss them. And
because
don't
they
order
believe
the test.
that, to a T. That,
yes.
Yeah. And that same doctor, after your DNC, when he came out to see me in the waiting room, he brought his little pad that had the scans on it.
I wish I had seen that.
Oh my gosh. And but he said the same to me. She's too young to have endometrial cancer, but we're going to send this off as part of protocol to pathology.
Yeah.
He wasn't dismissive, and like you said, he still had the test done. He still sent it to pathology. And then when you went to your follow-up and I was with you, he was very remorseful, very apologetic to both of us, and he admitted that he shouldn't have said that.
He almost fell over himself apologizing, and it at some point I was like,
stop.
Like, I really appreciate that you acknowledge this. Let's not do it to the next girl.
Yeah. And I guarantee he learned more from that experience with you than he did from any class in med school.
Definitely.
And unfortunately, that's what it took.
Yeah.
But good for him for, sitting up, admitting it, and moving on. But you're right. He did the test anyway, and I think that really is what counted.
I mean, it just speaks volumes. Now, a lot of people, they're not in a position where that's a possibility. Their insurance wouldn't cover it, or the doctor wouldn't order it, or whatever it may be. But it is important, if you can, to persist and to make sure that they're exhausting all of their options.
Yeah. And that's really why we do what we do.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to today's episode. You will see us next week. Same outfit, same day. Working on another region to show you a little bit more about what's going on in the world of cancer. So thanks for listening. And all of these notes, as I knock things over, will be on our website. So if you have any like things that you're like, oh, they said too many numbers and you want to go back and look at that, go check it out, downthereaware.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Down There Aware. Be sure to like and subscribe on our new YouTube channel, as well as on your favorite podcast platform. You can find us at Down There Aware on all social media sites: Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. If you have it, we're there at Down There Aware. You can learn more on our website, www.downthereaware.com, and always get in touch with us, downthereaware@gmail.com. See you next week.